This is the Baunfire Gaming Podcast, episode 355. I'm your host, Morgan, aka Bon Diesel, and this week we'll be talking about Mass Effect's TV show casting call possibly leaked, Battlefield 6 making controversial changes, Nvidia is investing into Intel, and much more. Be sure to subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast app, leave a review on Spotify or iTunes, and subscribe to the Bon Diesel YouTube channel to get all of my videos, including this podcast. Let's get into the gaming news. First, we have the Mass Effect TV show casting call was possibly leaked. I don't know the validity of this. It seems a little suspect to me. But basically, it lists off these various roles that they're looking for. And if you're a Mass Effect fan, many of the descriptions of the types of character they're looking for are going to sound pretty familiar. The first one is for a male lead, I believe. And it's it literally says a young Colin Farrell, which even if you look at young Colin Farrell, actually kind of looked a lot like the face model they used for the original Mass Effect game. Off the top of my head, I can't even remember the dude's name. He was like a Dutch model or something, who I believe has extremely vehemently stayed away from the Mass Effect fandom. I from what I've read, that he's not really embraced that, while many of the other people who were either face models or voice actors and stuff obviously have. So there's a lead position they're looking for a male protagonist. It sounds like it's just basically Shepard or male Shep or M Shep. The other one that was really obvious, at least to most people, was a female co-lead who would have to wear prosthetics. This is obviously Liara, at least to me. What was kind of compelling about these cast listings, if they're real, is that they kind of reinforce that summary of the show that was leaked a while back, or that was found a while back, that basically alluded to that they're remaking Mass Effect 1, right? So that's a pretty controversial topic on its own. The Mass Effect community is weird, much like most groups of people involved in anything. The vast majority of people are great, are fine, are at least relatively normal. And then you're always going to have some extreme parts of the community that make the rest of them look bad, right? And Mass Effect is definitely one of those communities. For me, it's a little frustrating because, like, on the content creator side of things, I think that there's some content creators who don't really help with this, whether they themselves are problematic or they kind of inspire a problematic community. But, you know, that's kind of a individual idea or opinion. But there's been so much talk around what this TV show will show. And, you know, there's all these things of like, oh, it should be a spinoff. They should make it a prequel and show this person's origin story, or this or that or the other. Like, the problem is that Mass Effect just doesn't really have lore that's that deep. And I think people, you know, that maybe a show could improve that. But you're also talking about a franchise that hasn't had any new entries to its lore since 2018. And even then, with Mass Effect Andromeda, that had basically nothing to do with the trilogy, which is what the most people associate with Mass Effect. And there's books that definitely explored parts of the story, and, you know, things that happened before the games and after and during and so on and so forth. But there's just never been, there's 4 games, right? One comparison when it came to how they should tell the story over and over and over again has been Fallout. The Fallout TV show, which will also be on Prime, is a masterclass. They have the perfect balance, at least in my opinion, of introducing new characters from a new place, but introducing them into a world that is familiar. under the impression this is a world that takes place after New Vegas, and likely after even Fallout 4. And it's a situation where there are familiar references to the factions or even to specific characters and so on and so forth. And that seems like that's going to go into overcharge when it comes into the season 2 of the Fallout show, going back to New Vegas and all that. But they told a new story in a familiar setting, and I don't disagree that would be a cool way to handle this Mass Effect show. Maybe it could take place after Mass Effect 3, and this could be their bridge to whatever the next game is going to be, right? Like, it could be their bridge. It could be their way of showing, like, oh, well, this is what happened after Mass Effect 3, yada, yada, yada. And then the next game comes out and it picks the story up from there. But that doesn't seem like it's what they're doing. And I think it's a good idea. If you've caught any of my Mass Effect videos or podcasts, you will have almost certainly recently heard me say, Mass Effect has to reestablish itself as a brand. BioWare kind of has to reestablish itself as a brand. And their best way of doing that is for the next Mass Effect to be successful. And learning many lessons from Dragon Age the Dreadwolf, or the Veilguard, my bad. One of those lessons has to be, you need to help make this franchise relevant again before you release another game. It had been 10 years since they released the Dragon Age game. There had been, I believe, some animated projects and, some small things that only for the deepest of the deep cut, fans would have kept them going. But otherwise, a lot of the people who played the Dragon Age games back in the day, like, don't play games anymore or haven't played them in a long time. And, newer, younger fans have probably never heard of Dragon Age. So you release the Veilguard with a decent marketing campaign that got hampered really badly by Game Informer getting shut down, or at least temporarily. And it left with this situation where, Dragon Age the Veilguard came out. It didn't have a big enough, install, like, already existing fan base to make the game super successful. And it didn't attract enough new people to it because a lot of new people had no idea what it was. It was just another high fantasy, action adventure RPG game that came out from BioWare, who, to newer, younger folks, doesn't really mean anything to them unless they picked up on the Mass Effect Legendary Edition or something like that, right? So them retelling the original Mass Effect story from Mass Effect 1 makes sense. It's a really good way to onboard people into the franchise, into the IP, to give them a setting of what we're doing here, of who the Turians are and how the humans got to this point in technology to be interacting with all these other aliens and all of that stuff, right? Like, that's a story that's compelling. And honestly, the story of Mass Effect 1 can be truncated down into a show pretty easily because, if you cut out all the side missions and stuff, it's a pretty simple story. It's, you find out that the Geth are outside of their area and that there's someone leading them, and you suspect it's this guy, and you tell the people in charge it's that guy, and they don't believe you. So then you have to go prove it, and you prove it, and then they believe you finally, and you go to make a move to stop them from building an army to help, their bad cause. You temporarily set them back, and then they make a big move, and then you have the finale of the show, right? With all the little politics and interpersonal relationships and all of that in between. That's a good, solid place to start. How would they handle, a Mass Effect 2 would probably be fairly easy to put into a show form as well. Each, you'd have multiple episodes of recruitments and how you get those people's loyalty and all that. And then the big final, suicide run. That's fairly climactic. And Mass Effect 3, I feel like would need to be like a movie or something. Doing that in the show would be difficult or not. I don't know. There's such a ambivalence to this idea of them telling the Mass Effect 1 story, because they might not make the same choices, or it sounds like it's going to be a male Shepard, and there's people who are so upset about that. And it's like, just like with the end of Mass Effect 3, as they move on to the next series, the next game in the franchise, all of your choices can exist in your playthrough. Them potentially picking certain choices or characters and stuff like that for a TV show or even for the next game for canon reasons doesn't completely invalidate your favorite playthrough or favorite choices and stuff. It's just them moving forward with ones that they decided were best for their purposes, right? And that's how this show will be. That's how the next game will be. And I think people need to chill. Like, if they do a male shepherd, that doesn't invalidate every femshep playthrough that's ever happened, or every femshep, fandom or whatever, right? It's just a choice that they're going to make, and it's just one way the story could go. They could make 20 different seasons of retelling the Mass Effect 1 story based on different choices and so on. So I think people need to chill. I've said a lot that there's really, if this upsets you, then just don't pay attention to it. If you're excited about it, then be excited, right? It's one of those things where I think there are bigger things at play here for Mass Effect and for BioWare and so on. And that this is just one of the many things they're probably going to do over the next 2-3 years to try to make this franchise notable again. I assume there's going to be crossovers with Fortnite, and they're going to put out comics or books or an animated series or this, that, or the other, right? Like, this is very, very likely the start of a campaign for the next Mass Effect game. And I want it to be successful, even if the show isn't great. Halo show sucked. Halo's doing pretty good. Infinite turned out to be pretty good, right? I assume whatever they do next will be great. It doesn't all have to be really, really good sometimes. And the Big Bang Theory proved it to us. Not everything has to be good to be popular, right? Or to get its grips in the people and so on and so forth. So people need to chill. There was a weird story that came out around this as well, in that some of Daniel Casey, who's one of the main people who's interacted with the community, he's, I believe, like an executive producer or something along those lines for the Mass Effect show. He had deleted his, either threads or Instagram or whatever. And some people were throwing out like, oh, he was harassed into deleting his stuff, only for people to fairly quickly after that find some post he made on other platforms being like, I'm getting away from Meta. Things are just weird with that company. So I'm deleting, Facebook, Instagram, threads, and so on. And that was it. It happened before these supposed leaks of the cast list even came out anyways. So it was like one of those things where, and I think most of the people, the notable folks corrected themselves and stuff, and that's cool. But it was definitely one of those lessons of like, almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy to a point of like, is it worth a few clicks to run with a story or with this thing that just wasn't true? That was just completely false. Maybe that's a decision for other people to make for themselves. But I'm excited for the Mass Effect show, even if it kind of sucks. I'm excited that something's happening. I'm very much to the point with Mass Effect where if anything is happening with it that isn't BioWare shutting down, it's probably a good thing in some capacity, or you can at least spin it that way, right? So that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. For the next story, we have Battlefield 6. There's actually a bunch of little stories here, but the first one is they're testing movement changes with mixed reactions. So they've put out some info this week, and people who have been able to keep testing the game in Battlefield Labs have been posting. And basically, they're making it so you can't bunny hop. You can't slide around corners and light up a whole row of people. It's, they're allowing you to have some of these movement abilities, but they're doing things like when you jump, your accuracy gets completely jacked up. You can't be doing any jumping off of buildings, no scope 360 headshots, right? And that's a good thing. There's games where that's a thing. If you want to play a game where like movement is one of the biggest things, play some Apex Legends. The movement in that game is wonderful. It is so nice to move around that world. Even Call of Duty, especially the new one, looks like it's going to have little jump jets and all that stuff. There's an option there. Battlefield games, in my opinion, are best when they slow things down, right? Even in Battlefield 2042, there's arguably too much sliding and some of the silly stuff out there. And it's not too bad. You see very few people really being extremely effective with like kind of crazy movements, kind of Call of Duty style movements. But it's there a little bit. And it was extremely there when they did the beta test. There were some really tough clips, right, that came out from that where people were like, bounding across, doing bunny hops across the map and bouncing through areas, using all kinds of stuff to, be doing like 360 shots, all this stuff. It was only going to be abused by a fairly small number of people, but now it won't be abused by anyone. Some of the reactions have been interesting. I will tell you that as a very small content creator who does this stuff for fun and doesn't pay any attention to the Battlefield content creator community, I'm sure there's some really cool Battlefield creators. There's still some doing it from back when I used to pay attention to them like 15 years ago, like Jack Frags and Stone Mountain and all those people. But some of the newer folks, at least, are just completely insufferable. And I genuinely, to my heart, believe that this whole conversation around movement, that they don't really care. They know it kind of just doesn't matter at the end of the day, but they're also bored and they don't have anything to talk about until the game comes out. That it's just a hot button, topic, and they know that they can talk about it, get a bunch of clicks on social media and on YouTube, and that's just the way it's going. But I've been, fairly vocal about some of them who are just straight up being huge babies. Like there's one creator who every single week does the whole like, because they're doing a Battlefield 2042. You can unlock cosmetics for 6 if you run through this battle pass. And you get double XP on the weekend. So this person's like, oh, well, I have to play Battlefield 2042 this weekend. It's like, no, you don't. You don't have to play it. These cosmetics, you're probably never going to use them. I only have 10 levels left. I'm level 50 or 49 or something out of 60. There's a really good chance, I can almost guarantee that when Battlefield 6 comes out, I won't use a single cosmetic I've unlocked, right? But it's been something fun to do, stay in Battlefield, keep playing it. Even though it is so different than 6. I've been enjoying it. And it's just been kind of a buzzkill to see that a lot of, at least I assume the younger Battlefield content creators are just literally gigantic babies. It is really frustrating to pay attention to. A bit of the other news that we got is that they have a new version of aim assist for console players. They're calling it as like aim assist 2.0 or something. Some other games, I think like Apex and Call of Duty and stuff, are kind of known for their almost aimbot like, almost cheating like aim assist for console players, to the point where I believe that there's some PC players who literally have switched to console to take advantage of the aim assist. Battlefield 2042 has a little aim assist. It's very vague, at least in my experience. It is not very noticeable, and I don't think is as abused as maybe some other games. And then it looks like in Battlefield 6, they're going even deeper into that and making it very much an assist and not a straight up like aimbot that, pulls around your cursor and all that. So I think that's a good thing. I hold my own extremely well playing on Xbox Series X on 2042. And even during the beta, which I played through Battlefield or through Xbox, I held my own just fine. So I think that especially if it's an improvement on what we've already touched, it's going to be pretty solid. If there's console players who don't want to play with PC players, there was a rumor that went around earlier this week of like, oh, there's a console only mode. So, it's cross-play with just PlayStation and Xbox. Unfortunately, that's not true. I was really hoping it was true. That would be great. But they did kind of reaffirm that for console players, the matchmaking preferences will always be, it will try to put you with all console people, but it will fill in servers with people on PC and stuff like that as necessary. So I don't really care. I mean, there's definitely times in 2042 where I've noticed like, oh, that person killed me because they're on mouse and keyboard. They were just able to traverse faster, aim faster, whatever. But 99% of the time, I don't feel at a disadvantage, especially if they're slowing down the pace of the game and, that quickie, twitchy movement isn't as essential as it can be in games that are very PC heavy. So there was a kind of funny thing that happened with Battlefield 6 this week. I believe it was Kotaku ran a headline on an article basically saying something along the lines of, Xbox Series S, made development hard of Battlefield 6. This was kind of funny because if you actually read the article in the interview that the article came from, it was a DICE developer, the people who primarily make Battlefield, basically saying it was difficult to make this game work well on the Series S. And so we focused on optimization, and now the game runs insanely good on everything. And it's one of those moments where, I guess you run that headline, you got to get the clickbait, you got to do what you got to do, I guess. But it sucked because it just, it's running off of that idea that the Series S is like really held back gaming this gen and stuff like that. And that doesn't appear to be the case. It seems like some studios have struggled with it more than others, but for the most part, even now, the only game that ever got an exception to not have the same feature set on X and S was Baldur's Gate 3 for its split screen multiplayer, and now it even has that on Series S. So that's not even a thing anymore. It seems like it's just taken some studios a bit longer to figure out the Series S, but it's, especially for its price point, especially its original price point, has been a real beast of a little machine, and I don't think it gets enough credit for that. So boo to the journalists who run with crappy titles and clickbait, but yay to all the people who didn't, and to the Series S for making it seems like Battlefield 6 be one of the best performing console games of this generation, that also looks really, really good at the same time. And then finally, I talked about the Battlefield 2042 Battle Pass grinding. I think I'm level 49. We have, I think, 2 more weeks of the assignments where you can unlock. Like, I assume if I don't fully unlock the pass on Monday, like this coming week, then it'll happen easily before the game comes out. So I'm super pumped about that. And here's my hottest take. I hope they do an early access pass for it, because I'll pay for it. I'm going to pay for it. I'm going to buy it. I don't care. I know it's a bad thing to do. I know it's a stupid decision to make financially. Is it really worth playing the game 2 or 3 days early and paying $20 for that privilege? Yeah, it is, because I'm really excited about it, and I don't want your judgment. I'm like kind of kidding. Neil Druckmann of Naughty Dog is saying that Intergalactic, he's bragged that Intergalactic will be their biggest, most ambitious game, and it's going to be the most expensive game to date. This gave me such like an ick when I read it, because, specifically PlayStation first party games, we have all these reports that they're having all these issues there where, yeah, they sell 5, 10 plus million copies of their games because they have this really loyal fan base and they've sold all these consoles. But those games take $250 million to make. And even if they sell 10 million copies or more, they're barely making any money off of them. And just the kind of general issue that sounds like PlayStation is having, which is low profit margins in general, and how, devastating that can be for a game platform and developer, and especially the publisher and, platform holder. It's not good for them. Right. So I found this story, and it wasn't much more than that. He was also talking about how he's going to stay involved in the Last of Us TV show, but he may step back a little so he can focus on the games and this and that. I just personally found this whole conversation around Intergalactic to just be weird, because it's like, this isn't The Last of Us. This isn't one Uncharted or one of their games that is like established. This is a new IP, a new franchise, and those struggle, and it'll be helped because people like Naughty Dog and they like their games and they trust them to make a good game. But like this, this seems like it's going to be a different experience than they've done before, and they're going to have their people who are going to love it no matter what it is, no matter how it plays, no matter how good it is or not. But they are going to have to win some people over, and doing that with a new IP, it's hard, man. And especially Naughty Dog has the whole issue of, like, say Intergalactic comes out and it's like a 70, 70 Metacritic, a good game, but not like an all timer, right? You're going to have a similar issue of what Destiny has done to Bungie, where people are just saying, just make Destiny 3. What are we doing here? Why are we making Marathon? Why are we making more Destiny 2 content? Well, with Naughty Dog, you're going to have this issue of, Intergalactic, it's like a 75 on Metacritic. Like, that's pretty good, but you could have gotten a 90 if you made The Last of Us 3. You could have gotten a 90 if you made another Uncharted game or something like that, right? So You know, it's one of those things for them that it's kind of a damned if they do or don't situation. You can't blame them for not wanting to do another Last of Us game, at least not yet. You know, I've seen this kind of franchise burnout from, you know, developers of like The Division, or even we know all these stories about Mass Effect. With after Mass Effect 3, that entire team didn't want to make any more Mass Effect games, so they made Anthem, and it was a huge disaster, right? And they let another team make you know, Mass Effect Andromeda, and that didn't work out very well, right? So you know, you understand why these teams and these studios want to try different stuff, but in like today's market and today's industry, that's a hard justification to make, and where you can have, you know, they can make a game, you know, and these games all take forever to make. They can spend 4 or 5 years making The Last of Us 3, which will almost certainly be a hit, even if it's mediocre. Or they can spend 4 or 5 years making something else that we'll just have to wait and see what happens to it, which also means that your sure hit is another 3, 4, 5 years away, right? So yeah, I just found the comments by him like bragging about how big this game is, how expensive it is, to be a weird take, because right now even these big AAA studios and platforms and publishers are kind of struggling to even, you know, fund and, you know, complete these big giant AAA games, and, you know, PlayStation and Naughty Dog are no exception to that. And kind of a strange story that I don't think we will see the full repercussions of for a while. Nvidia, the GPU maker and the big AI innovator, quote unquote, has invested $5 billion into Intel, presumably for AI products and other kind of code development opportunities. This is some of the, I read a bunch of announcements, and a lot of the PR speak and stuff is kind of hard to decipher. Nvidia spent a lot of time referencing Intel's x86 architecture on their CPUs, which if you don't know, that x86, the type of processor that AMD and Intel makes, you have to like license that technology, and the x86 is licensed, and the license holder won't just give it to everyone. So Nvidia makes CPUs as well as GPUs, but they have to use ARM architecture, ARM, which is becoming more popular, but is still pretty fledgling, especially compared to x86. And x86 is going to be important to future PCs and future game consoles and, you know, all that stuff. This team up is interesting. It seemed, I imagine it's mostly because Intel is making a bunch of fabrication facilities to make chips for GPUs and stuff like that. I have to imagine a big part of this deal is Nvidia just trying to get more bandwidth to make more stuff, because, you know, that's how they make, you know, billions of dollars, become the most you know, profitable, or the company worth most in the world. Sorry. And I have to imagine it's pretty simple there. I have this weird dream of one day Nvidia kind of, you know, basically acquires or partners very deeply with Intel and says, hey, Intel, make consumer CPUs, keep doing that, keep innovating, keep trying to compete with AMD. Also, here's a bunch of tech that you can make consumer GPUs with. So you have Intel Arc cards, which are good, but you infuse them with Nvidia tech, allowing them to have DLSS, allowing them to have, you know, all of this tech that has set Nvidia apart, and they can basically let Intel handle that part of the business, and then Nvidia just does what they've been doing and focuses on enterprise and you know, not consumer grade stuff with AI and hardware and all their big server farms and all that stuff. Because, you know, if you're a PC gamer, you know that Nvidia you know, at this point, it seems like they make GPUs just to say they do. They don't care. We have indications that much of the 5000 series line of GPUs isn't even being produced anymore, because they're using that bandwidth for other things. So it kind of makes that Intel acquisition, or not acquisition, but partnership, seem, you know, pretty, you know, reasonable, if their plan is to continue pushing really hard into the enterprise kind of business to business market, which has kind of left a lot of consumers feeling abandoned if they're gamers and stuff like that, despite the fact that I think objectively Nvidia still has the best GPUs, even if we all miss, you know, EVGA, because they essentially pushed them out one way or the other. So I suspect that Intel story is going to end up being pretty big. I don't think it fixes all of Intel's problems. They recently, had a big investment from the United States. Now they get a big one from Nvidia. Maybe that gets them back up on their feet. But like Intel really needs to make a competitive CPU at some point, because AMD has just been kicking their butts since like the 2000 series, and we're now on the 5000 series actually no, we're in the 7000 series of CPUs from AMD. So it's been a good 5+ years now that AMD just kicks Intel's butt, especially in consumer grade stuff. And it doesn't seem like Intel's putting up much of a fight. They just seem like they're trying to stay alive. Epic's Randy Pitchford has blamed consumers' hardware for Borderlands 4 performance issues, despite it having issues even on top PCs. So Randy Pitchford, if you aren't familiar with his game, he has none. He is a huge Jackass online. He's also like a multi-billionaire from his ownership of Epic, who also owns, the Unreal Engine and all of that stuff. Fortnite, all that fun stuff. He pops off all the time online and often comes off as a huge douche nozzle, and that's what he's done here. So basically, Borderlands 4 doesn't run great, especially on consoles, but even on PC it doesn't run well. And even people with 5090s, even with people that have these like $4,000 or $5,000 rigs, are reporting that it's not running great. I believe specifically I've seen people talk about how it's just very CPU heavy, and so it's like burning people's CPUs up. You better have a pretty legit cooler if you want this game to run well on it, and that's also probably why it's struggling on consoles, because their CPUs are pretty good, but they're definitely getting a bit long in the tooth at this point. But yeah, like, and to be fair, I've seen other reports from people with like fairly mediocre machines or even consoles where they're fine with it. A big problem is that the people who are doing this testing, who are like have like lab setups and all that, they're so much more. They pay so much more attention to this stuff, each little temperature and all that stuff. Where a regular gamer may be playing a game at 35 FPS and they don't know any different. It's perfectly fine to them. So those reports are always kind of tough to take when you're just being inundated with them from all over the internet. But I do think that it seems like there is something here where the game should have been polished a bit more, which my last point on it is funny to consider, because Borderlands 4 was moved up 2 weeks. A few months ago, they announced like, oh, we're not delaying the game, we're bringing it forward. And then seeing the issues that they've had with it kind of makes you wonder if with maybe 2 more weeks, they would have been able to squash at least some of the issues that they've been having. That is hindsight is 2020. Hell Is Us Studios creative director said that Silksong's surprise release was quote a little callous, unquote, and fears that hurt their sales. This was a weird one. So Hell Is Us is this kind of basically indie game that it's kind of a Souls-ish melee fighting game, or primarily melee fighting game, where you're in this like realistic world where you're in a country that supposedly is having a civil war. At least that's what's told to people on the outside. But on the inside, you basically find as this main character going back home that it's like there's all these abominations and monsters everywhere and stuff like that. Hell Is Us was always going to be a very niche game. I personally didn't like it. I think the combat isn't very fun, and I hate the design aesthetic of the enemies. But it's doing some interesting stuff. It's a very non-handholdy game where like you barely even get objectives and stuff on your missions. You basically just get verbal and written clues, and you have to kind of figure it out. Some people love that. I think most people don't. And so it was like kind of weird to see this report from this developer being like, yeah, they like really screwed us over. And it's like, guy, I don't know if your guys' 2 games were ever even like in similar conversations. One stat I pulled up, to be very clear, I don't think that Steam charts matter that much. I don't think player counts are the end all be all of quality of a game or anything. But more specifically to this idea that, Silksong coming out when it did on short notice hurt this game that had announced that date for, at least a bit longer. Hell Is Us peaked at 4,000 players on Steam. Silksong peaked at 462,000. These are 2 games that were never even in the same atmosphere, that were never in the same room, never in the same capsule. Hell Is Us, maybe it missed out on a few sales because people were distracted by Silksong. I doubt it was that many people. I suspect most of the people who wanted to buy Hell Is Us bought it. And, I'd say a decent number of people have been convinced to buy it later on by reviews and so on and so forth. But I just refuse to believe that that Silk Song really affected them at all, because they're simply two games in such completely different categories of attention and genre and popularity and all of that. So this just feels like sour grapes from dude. Even though I'm fairly certain when I saw the text, I suspect he wasn't being as bitter as it's being portrayed as by some people, but it was just, calling it callous is certainly a choice. In a recent report, PlayStation showed that as little as 3% of their sales are physical at this point. That's a big deal, because I don't have the citations right in front of me, but it wasn't that long ago, maybe beginning of this generation, maybe the end of last. Xbox has been really low on physical sales for quite a while. I think even Xbox One and before, because you've had the ability for so long. I haven't bought a physical game since my 360, just as my example. But PlayStation wasn't so quick to adopt, and now it seems like they are, or at least that's the way it's going, with only 3% of sales being physical. That definitely increases the likelihood that future consoles will potentially not have any disc reader, or at least will make it optional. Even now, the Series X has a discless version. The PS5, the newer versions of it, and the PS5 Pro, you can outfit without a CD drive, or you can buy one separate, or some have these bundle things where it comes with it. And the rumors for the next consoles are that the PS6 will have a option to have a drive or not, and we don't really know about Xbox yet. I suspect Xbox would at the very least keep a plug-in USB drive that you could use if you absolutely had to, especially backwards compatibility and all of that stuff. But I wouldn't be surprised at all if this time they push a discless version. With all the talk of the Series S and X and that whole strategy, I'll trust them that they felt like they made the right move there. To this day, though, I still think that PlayStation's strategy was probably smart, and that Xbox could have really benefited from copying it. Essentially having the Series X with a disc be the $499, having a discless one for $399, and actually having them in stock would have been a big deal. Hell, if that's the same pricing as the PS5, get crazy, cut it $50 each, undercut PlayStation a little bit. It wouldn't have mattered. At this point, the base impression I'm under is that the PlayStation 5 is going to sell, or it currently has sold, 80 to 85 million units. We're under the impression Xbox has probably sold 30 to 35 million units. They've doubled them up, if not more. But that number probably would have been closer. I suspect that number would have been closer had they not had done what they did. But the Series S, it's so funny. Most of the criticism of Series S is from people who don't have them, because I don't know that if I've ever seen anyone who has a Series S who's complained about it, especially if they just know what it was meant to be. It's not meant to be a 4K 60 FPS machine. That's not its goal. So I think this whole conversation about digital and physical, the physical people are very loud, and they're it seems to be vocal minority. And I suspect that, for one more gen, I think the boxes will respect it by at least giving you an option to have a disc still. I think it's done after that. But honestly, beyond this next gen of consoles in the first place, who knows? Who knows what's going to happen? Will there be more Xboxes? Will PlayStation move and make a big move and do something different? We don't know. We'll have to wait and find out. We have found out that Hades 2 is coming exclusively to Switch 2, Switch 2 and Switch 1, as well as PC on September 25th. And that is a timed exclusivity. So we fully expect it to be coming to other platforms at a later date, specifically PlayStation and Xbox. I guess Nintendo must throw a big pile of money at it was a Supergiant or whoever makes the Hades games. But good for them, I guess. I mean, that game, I'm willing to bet just some pre-orders and stuff, that game has paid itself off. People are huge freaks about the first Hades. I've played it. It's cool. I get it. It's a nice feeling game to play. The characters are all hot. You know, I get it. I understand the love for it. I'm just not very good at those games, so it's never really caught on for me. But you know, Hades 2 looks like it's going to be yet another hit and yet another game that's going to make the game of the year conversation this year just completely bonkers. It's I don't know. I don't know how the, like, because I haven't played everything and no one has. So it's going to be one of those things where game of the year this year is just going to be a bunch of people voting on the best game they played this year. Because there's just not going to be any way that people have played everything. So we'll see. Okay, we're hitting some of the quicker stories here. Clair Obscure Expedition 33 has sold 4.4 million copies. I think there's going to be some people who are going to look at that and be like, oh, that's it. I think for the game that was, especially when you consider that they had to have had at least a few million people play it through Game Pass. It's, you know, so between that and it was a day one, a day one, not exclusive, but it was day one on Game Pass. So almost certainly Xbox threw a big fat check at them to help them with development costs and all that. At the end of the day, I suspect this has made Sandfall, who made the game, very, very, very able to make whatever they make next. Now, there's been teases and hints and rumors that they're doing DLC. They just straight up, you know, I think the director of the studio just recently straight up said, like, yeah, we're not done with this universe. Like, we're going to make more games in that world. Now, is it going to be a sequel or something with the characters, or at least a couple of the characters we already know? Maybe. Is it going to be something completely different? Without spoiling things, there's a whole faction in that world that we have had no interactions with. So could they tell a new story from those people's point of view in a long play to eventually bring them together? I don't know. But I'm very excited for Clair Obscure. I think in Game of the Year and stuff, it's going to struggle just because it's been out for a long time. But I feel like it's a game that, especially because of the music, it is just going to hold on to people's minds. And it may not be as sure of a bet for Game of the Year as it would have been if Game of the Year happened in June or something. I suspect people are gonna remember, like, oh yeah, that was great. I've even talked about potentially doing maybe not a full playthrough, but jumping back into the game and playing it again to remind myself of, like, oh yeah, this game's got the juice. Like, so if you haven't played it, I highly suggest it. Even if you're not a, you know, that kind of combat type of player, especially because it does have action elements involved in it. It's not a perfect game. No game is, but especially for a new franchise and a new IP and all the twists and turns that you go through emotionally in the story of that game, you gotta play it. A Fortnite crossover with K-pop Demon Hunters with possible Huntrix character skins being added to the game has been kind of rumored and leaked. This has got to be the most obvious crossover ever. K-pop Demon Hunters became, from what I've seen in my life, one of the biggest hits quicker than ever of any brand I've ever seen, any new thing. Admittedly, I've seen the movie probably a dozen times at this point, mostly because my daughter. I also don't turn it off. I love the music in it and the animation and the voice acting, and it's a great movie. It's fairly simple narrative wise, but it works, and I really, really enjoy it. It's a really cool new IP. You know, for me, being the dad of a little girl, you have these like strong characters who are still flawed but find ways to overcome their flaws. Like, I love that stuff, man. It's great. I think it's a really good lesson for little ones, especially little girls, to see some strong strong ladies, you know, leading that movie and being a, you know, part of this big new franchise, and then being in Fortnite. I'm gonna be straight up, I might pull out the wallet and load up Fortnite for the first time in 3-4 years and get them, play a couple rounds with them, and then never touch it again. I am a bit ashamed of some of the skins I've purchased on Fortnite for a game that I just never play, but I want to have it maybe just in case one day I like Fortnite. I don't know. Like, if they do a Mass Effect crossover one day, I'll be in there 100%. So that's where we're at. MindsEye voice actor fears that they won't get any more opportunities in the industry, but also acknowledges that gamers are entitled to their opinions. This is a game that, like, it was talked about for like 24 hours. It was supposed to be, they were touting it as this big Grand Theft Auto competitor. At one point in development, the engine it was running on, it was supposed to be like, MindsEye was going to be this game, but there was also going to be like this engine that you can make your own games with. It's the engine they used, and it just obviously hasn't worked out. I feel bad about this story though, because the people who made the game, especially the leads at that studio, who came off as kind of shady and not all that great. But this voice actor, he was excited that this giant project with all this money in it, he was going to be the protagonist's voice. Like, if you're trying to get into voice acting and gaming and other media, kind of outlets, that's a big deal. That's a big thing to have on your, on your resume, to say like, oh, I was voice actor for the main character in this game that they spent $150 million on. Something tells me that mystique is gone from that game, because you could tell me that game got taken off the market and isn't even being sold anymore, and I would believe you. But I don't think that's happened. We'll see if they try to do like a comeback story at some point. I am not very hopeful. Daryl Gallagher has left Xbox after the initiative was shuttered. He was I believe the main director of the initiative. Made this statement basically saying like, hey, I'm really proud of what we did. It just didn't work out, which I think is fair. He's been involved with franchises in the past, such as Call of Duty, Destiny, and the Tomb Raider games. Yeah, like I was talking about this on a stream the other day, that I'm curious. I would love to see like NoClip or someone do a video or a documentary about how a studio shuts down. Because specifically we were talking about Casey Hudson, who had Humanoid Origin, which was a studio after he left BioWare. He started his own studio and was trying to make this, BioWare-esque game that we never even got a title for, never saw any footage. We just saw some concept art. But back in the end of 2024, he announced that they were shuttering. They put out all this stuff, like, trying to find jobs for their employees and all that stuff. But like for like 9 months, they've said nothing. Casey Hudson hasn't said anything. The Humanoid Origin, like, social media accounts are still out there. But if you looked on like LinkedIn, most people have taken that company and said that they're no longer working there. So like, obviously the place is shut down. But what I would be curious about with like the initiative, Humanoid Origin, these other studios, is what like the process of shutting down a studio even looks like. Like, I assume some of the higher ups stay on until the final days of, them selling the building and getting rid of, like, how do they do that? Like, obviously that's just real estate. I'm sure they just sell a building. But what about like the IP? Do they try to sell the IP off to someone? Do they, if they had any, right? How do they sell off all their computers? Like, all those developers probably had computers with like, 4090s in them. And then, these like $3,000-$4,000 computers that even today are probably still pretty nice, but are also very specialized to game development. Like, what do they do with all that stuff? Like, I'd be so curious to see a documentary about like how a studio closes. It would be depressing. It would be sad, right? Like, you don't want to revel in that, but I think it would be good to show people like, hey, when the studio shuts down, it shouldn't just be some console war conversation on Twitter. Like, here's what happens. Here's these people getting their notices that they're laid off. Here's them turning in their equipment. Here's the CEO of the studio or the director of the studio, packing up computers and selling them, or dropping things off and, giving tours to, or allowing, real estate people to come in and do tours of their building while they're still there working. I think that'd be really interesting. So I'll be curious if we ever get something like that. Exodus has started to deliver their $65 encyclopedias / kind of art books, even though we haven't seen anything significant about the game ever, and that they haven't really had any big updates in a while. Exodus is a game being made by Archetype Studios. They are under Hasbro. A large number of the developers and the leadership at Archetype are former BioWare folks, including, some of the writing staff and the directors and all that. And, for a while, Exodus was this big story of like, oh, we have this weird world where we've like genetically altered animals and they can like think and talk and help out. And we have, these creatures, humans have been gone from other humans so long that they've like evolved into these other creatures and with these abilities and all this stuff. And they put out a book, and now they have an encyclopedia art book thing. And they've put out like a little bit of concept art. The last one that they showed looked really, really bad, but like, we still haven't seen this game. It's something to consider. Just in the last like 6 months, the Expedition Osiris Reborn has been announced and will come out, I bet, before we get any significant information about Exodus. I don't wish bad on Exodus. I was always pretty vocal, even when they first started showing stuff, that like, man, everyone's getting so excited for this and they have nothing. Like, they obviously have nothing to show us. And they've done these, all these like Q&As and all these social media posts and YouTube videos and stuff. And it's always just like the people at the studio, like the kind of leads, the directors, just being like, man, it'd be really cool if we could do this, where it kind of seems like they're still not really sure what kind of game they're making. You know, maybe that's me just being presumptive, but yeah, I don't know. Exodus is a weird one. I'm really excited for the Expanse game. I'm really excited eventually for the Mass Effect game, but Exodus, it's a strange bird, man. I've had bad vibes for a long time on it, and I feel like that's been pretty well deserved for now. And I'll tell you what, I hope I'm wrong completely. I hope here, maybe at the Game Awards or in 2026, they say, okay, here it is. Here's the game, and it looks super cool, and I'm wrong, and I can't wait to play it. So we'll see. Skate's early access is out right now. You can play it for free. I've been checking out. I was never a big Skate, Tony Hawk fan, all of that. I've been playing this for a really long time, for like, at this point, multiple years in early access and alpha builds and beta builds and all that. It's neat. Like, I don't know. It seems like a cool skating game if you're into that. Skate always had a kind of more, I don't want to say realistic, but a more like grounded experience in the way that you did tricks and all that, where it wasn't just like combinations of face buttons, but it was like actually, like using like the sticks and stuff like that to more organically do tricks, I guess. And it seems like they've continued that. It's an interesting place to play a game, knowing that it's going to be free to play, knowing that it's going to be very dedicated to making money off microtransactions and all that. Like, all that stuff makes sense. I guess I'm just going to kind of leave it to like the people who really love that series to kind of tell us whether or not there's a good experience to be had in there, or if it really is just kind of this sellout to, this live service desire by every single publisher. And finally, we have the CEOs of Discord, Valve, Twitch, and Reddit are being called to Capitol Hill in the USA to speak on issues with moderation and extremism on their platforms. This comes in the wake of a political assassination that happened here in the States fairly recently. A right-wing, in my opinion, a pretty extreme, not very nice person got shot and killed by someone who basically seems like they didn't like their views and didn't feel like, that they could sway that in any other way. I obviously disagree with that decision. I think that, on two, like there's two parts of it, especially as we've seen the fallout of this, is one, it's never right to kill someone over ideas and things like that. That's obviously unacceptable. And two, from what we can tell, it's just been the opposite effect. Like, that person being killed, for people who didn't like what they think, like me, or who completely disagreed with that person in every way, shape, or form, it's made me be like, oh, come on, man. Like, we don't like, it's like embarrassing. Right. And then for people who did like that person and the things they said and the things they did and the things they stood for, it just lionizes them. It just reinforces their opinions. It makes them even more extreme. And so now things are just worse. Like, as far as I can tell, things are just worse. People haven't come together. There hasn't been some big moment of like, okay, things have gone too far. Let's all get onto the same page. It's just, nope. The president of the United States vaguely implied that, the other side is the enemy. Like, not some random senator, not some random podcaster, even though those people have been doing it too, but like the most powerful, quote unquote, the most powerful man on earth. Right. So now that I have that out, this whole thing, it's going to be interesting because there certainly are like legit issues on places like Discord, especially. We've seen multiple instances of, Discord being used by nefarious groups to organize nefarious things. We also, at least at one point, had indication that like the Ukrainian armed forces use Discord to coordinate attacks and stuff like that. But we also know that someone like me, I have a Discord, and there's like 8 people who regularly comment in it. There's like 60 people in the whole room. and it's a pretty tame, boring place to be. And then there's obviously all the corporate discords and stuff like that, with whether people use it as like an organization thing at work, or if you have like BioWare has their own Discord where people can talk about their games and all that stuff. So there probably are some moderation things there that are probably impossible to ever get perfect. It is weird that like Valve is part of this, because I mean, there's like communities there, but it's not the same, at least not in my opinion. Twitch is a weird one. That one seems very, very targeted towards some specific content creators on there who maybe the current administration doesn't like too much and thinks should be pushed down on. To be fair, I don't even like a lot of the people who I think they're going to be targeting here, but I also don't think they should be targeted by the feds. I think normal people like me can just be like, God, that dude's a jackass. But, whatever. And then Reddit is like a weird one too, because Reddit definitely is the home of a lot of extremism. I won't even do the both sides thing. I think that's inappropriate, but all I'll say is that if you look at certain subreddits, it's a weird indicator that either people are just being dishonest about the things they say on the internet, which is absolutely possible, or that there's people who literally just live in a different world, as far as I can tell, who just literally have a whole different, just out like who just have a different reality. Maybe it's the echo chamber they're in compared to my own echo chamber. I don't know. But the reason this matters and why I'm bringing it up is because, Twitch and Reddit and Valve and Discord are all gaming related. And there's been this real kind of weak push over the last couple of weeks to start to be like, gamers sure are violent. A lot of these school shooters are gamers, right? And I think that's going to be a pretty fruitless attempt to once again blame games for gun violence. It's a multifaceted problem, and I don't think games are a very big part of that. So we'll have to see what they come up with and what they try to push on us. For some content updates, we have I'm kind of kicking off my in 7-day Mass Effect 2025 content schedule. I actually, in previous years, I've been doing this like what we know video, where it's this really long video where I go through every single N7 day. I go through every year back to 2020 and talk about everything that we found out about the next Mass Effect game. There's just too much stuff to do that now, in my opinion. So I'm going to split it into 2 videos. I'm going to do one somewhat scripted, shorter video where I basically hit all the blogs and a couple big news stories around the next Mass Effect game and talk about the things that they have said and that we know, like the things we know for sure, to kind of get a grasp around that. And then I'm going to do a second video that's a little more laid back and a little more casual, where I'm going to go through the N7 days and specifically look at that 2020 trailer, look at the 2021 poster, look at the 2022 mass relay thing and Liara's voice in the background and all that stuff, and the 2023 trailer, and then the 2024 cosmetics for Dragon Age, where I'm gonna do like deep dives into each of those things, because what that will do is that video will probably be fairly long, but it's going to have like media involved, and then it will let that first video, the one that's more focused on blogs and stuff like that, be shorter, more succinct, because no one wants to stare at a BioWare blog page with me for an hour and a half. So I think that's going to work out. Around that, I'm also going to be making just regular videos, especially if we get any clues or anything leading up. I'll be doing podcasts and things like that. I do plan on having N7 Legend on again after N7 Day to do kind of a breakdown of whatever we get. Maybe it won't be much. Maybe it's going to be nothing. Maybe we'll get just as little as we did in 2024. I have no idea, but I'm going to treat it like it's in a big event because it's exciting for me either way. And I'm making some new logos and banners and all that stuff to kind of enjoy, probably starting in October. I'll probably start putting that stuff up, as well as my social media countdowns and all that stuff. So if you haven't already, make sure you're following me everywhere, both for as Bond Diesel and for the Mass Effect Hypecast. So you get all of those updates and stuff. I am super pumped that on the merch store for BioWare gear, I've secured discount codes. Now their discount codes last for 60 days and 100 uses. So if you want 20% off at the gear store, you can use code N7Day or N7Day 2025 and get 20% off. I get, I think, 5% or something, 7% commission or something on that. And I'll have those for 60 days. So I feel a little sneaky that I was able to get in on that. Honestly, it's probably not going to matter. The other part is I had my 8-year anniversary as a Twitch affiliate. I believe I started streaming in August of 2017 and hit affiliate in September. And, there's a couple years there where I streamed a ton. I streamed for hundreds of hours, made a decent amount of money, and then a baby came. And that's definitely changed everything. I'm okay with that. I enjoy just jumping on and streaming here and there. It's mostly to talk to a handful of people who I've either met in the past or who I've just been interacting with for 8+ years. And, I'm not making money off of it at this point, and that's okay. If you want to drop me a sub or something, I'll happily take it. I'll still take the money, but it's not really a big part of my life at this point. Mostly I just enjoy sharing games and having like live conversation with people. So if you've been one of those people, thank you very much. And that is where we are going to wrap this episode up. Thank you so much for listening to the episode. Thank you to everyone who supports as YouTube members and or Twitch subscribers. If you're interested in supporting this podcast and all of my other content, please check out the links in the show description. If you have any questions or feedback, hit me up on social media at Bondiesel or at the Baunfire. Join my Discord via the Linktree link in the episode description, or comment on Spotify or YouTube. I do see those, I promise. That is all I have for this episode of the Baunfire Gaming Podcast. So until next time.